He was 18 years old when he inherited a key to a hole in the ground, and what he found there would change not only his future, but the entire story of his past. If you've ever felt like you were completely on your own, stick with me and hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and expensive, understated disappointment. It was a smell I'd grown familiar with in the offices of social workers and case managers. But here, it had a different texture. This was the smell of money, even if it was money that had long since run out. My social worker, a perpetually tired woman named Carol, had called it a formality. "Your grandfather's estate," she'd said, the words clinical and distant, as if discussing a specimen under glass. "You're his next of kin. You have to be there." So there I was, a day after my 18th birthday, officially aged out of the state's care, and sitting in a leather chair that was worth more than every possession I owned, which were all packed into a single duffel bag at my feet. The chair sighed when I shifted, a soft, leathery sound of protest. I felt like I was wearing the wrong skin. The cheap suit they'd given me from the donation bin felt tight across the shoulders, a costume for a part I hadn't auditioned for. 2 years of group homes, 2 years of navigating the quiet violence of institutional life, had taught me how to make myself small, to observe, to expect nothing. It was a good skill to have in a room like this. The lawyer, a man named Arthur Abernathy, looked as ancient as the books lining his walls. He had thin, white hair combed over a pink scalp and glasses that magnified his pale, watery eyes. He didn't offer condolences. He just cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound, and slid a thin folder across the polished expanse of his mahogany desk. "Mr. Davies," he began, his voice like gravel stirred with a spoon. "I was your grandfather, Alistair Davies, legal counsel for over 30 years. His will is, to be blunt, uncomplicated." He opened the folder. The single sheet of paper inside seemed impossibly small to contain the sum of a man's life. After settling outstanding debts with creditors, of which there were a significant number, the remaining liquid assets of the estate amount to $1,472. He paused, letting the pathetic number hang in the air between us. It wasn't an insult, just a fact. I felt nothing. I hadn't seen my grandfather since I was 10 years old. He'd been a ghost, a myth, a name on a file. The man who had sent me away. The man who, for 8 years, hadn't sent a single letter or made a single call. This pittance felt appropriate, a final, silent confirmation of my worth to him. "There is, however, one other item," Abernathy continued, his tone unchanged. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a large, yellowed manila envelope, sealed with a thick wax stamp. It looked like something from another century. He slid it across the desk. It stopped just short of my hands, forcing me to lean forward to claim it. My name was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar script. Leo Davies. He was very specific about this. It was to be given to you only on your 18th birthday, and only after the will was read. I picked it up. It was heavy, lumpy. Inside, I could feel the hard, unyielding shape of a key and the stiff edges of folded paper. "What is it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. It was the first time I'd spoken. Abernathy adjusted his glasses. "It is the deed to a parcel of land in northern Oregon, approximately 5 acres, and the key, I presume, to whatever is on it." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, not pity, but something more complex. Curiosity, maybe. "To be frank, Leo, the land is worthless. It's undeveloped, rocky, and miles from any serviceable road. The county values it at next to nothing for tax purposes. It was his only asset that the creditors couldn't or wouldn't touch. Worthless, just like the cash. A final joke from a man I barely remembered. My hand tightened on the envelope. I should have just thrown it in the trash on my way out, taken the $1,400 and found the cheapest motel room in the city to figure out the rest of my life. That was the smart move. The survivor's move. But something held me back. Maybe it was the finality of it all. This was the last word from Alistair Davies, the last piece of a puzzle I'd never been allowed to solve. Why did he send me away? Why did he cut me off? He wasn't a monster. The memories I had, fractured and faded as they were of a kind man. A man with calloused hands who smelled of sawdust and pine needles, who taught me how to skip stones on the river behind his small, cluttered house. That man didn't square with the one who would throw his only grandson into the system and forget about him. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice low. Abernathy hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible pause, but in the silent, pressurized room, it was as loud as a gunshot. "Your grandfather was a complicated man," he said, his voice softer now. "He made choices that were difficult to understand. He wanted you to have this. He said it was the only thing of value he had left to give." The way he said it, the slight emphasis on the word value, suggested a meaning beyond money. I stood up, the leather chair sighing again, this time with relief. I tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of my ill-fitting suit jacket. "We'll set one up. My assistant will. We'll set one up. My assistant will handle it." As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me at the door. "Leo." I looked back. The lawyer's face was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality. But his eyes, magnified by the thick lenses, held a different story. "Be careful," he said. "Some histories are better left buried." The bus ride north was a long, slow crawl out of the life I knew. The city, with its grid of streets and familiar gray skyline, bled into suburbs, which then frayed into farmland, and finally dissolved into the dense, dark green of the Oregon wilderness. For 14 hours, I watched the world slide by the window, feeling like a ghost haunting the edge of other people's lives. I had the $1,400, minus the bus ticket, in a new bank account, a cheap burner phone Carol had given me as a parting gift, and the heavy envelope from my grandfather. I'd opened it on the bus, the drone of the engine a fitting soundtrack to the quiet revelation. Inside was an old, heavy iron key, pitted with rust, and a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a modern deed, but a hand-drawn map on thick, yellowed parchment. A circle was drawn in red ink with an X in the middle. Next to it were coordinates and a simple, stark instruction. "The door is on the north face of the ridge. The key fits only one lock. Trust what you find. Burn the rest." It felt less like an inheritance and more like the beginning of a scavenger hunt designed by a madman. The bus was mostly empty, just a few other solitary travelers lost in their own thoughts. The air grew colder as we climbed in elevation, the sky a flat, unforgiving gray. I thought about what Abernathy had said. Some histories are better left buried. What did he know? What kind of history did my grandfather, a simple carpenter as far as I knew, even have? The man I remembered built birdhouses and fixed sagging porches. He wasn't a man of secrets and iron keys. Or was he? The memories were a child's memories, unreliable and painted with the broad strokes of emotion. Maybe I never knew him at all. The last 8 years had taught me to be pragmatic, to not hope for things that weren't there. Hope was a vulnerability, a weakness that could be exploited. And yet, a tiny, stubborn seed of it was sprouting in the barren soil of my chest. For the first time since I was 10, I had a destination. It was a worthless piece of land and a mysterious lock, but it was something. It was a thread leading back into a past that had been violently severed. The bus dropped me off at a crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. The town, if you could call it that, was named Hemlock Creek. It consisted of a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a general store with a faded Coca-Cola logo painted on its brick side. The air was sharp and clean, smelling of damp earth and pine. It was a smell from my childhood, a scent that unlocked a phantom limb of memory. I felt a pang in my gut, a mix of nostalgia and dread. I went into the general store to buy a powerful flashlight, batteries, some water, and a few protein bars. The man behind the counter was old, with a weathered face and a friendly, tired smile. "Passing through?" he asked, ringing up my items. "Something like that," I said. "I'm looking for a piece of property out on Ridge Road." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ridge Road? Ain't much out there but trees and old logging tracks. Which parcel?" I hesitated, then showed him the map. He squinted at it, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his shirt pocket. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "That's the old Davies place. Haven't seen anyone head out that way in, must be close to a decade. Alastair's boy, are you?" The question was casual, but it landed like a punch. "Grandson," I corrected him, my voice tight. "He passed away." The man's face softened. "Sorry to hear it. He was a good man. Kept to himself, but a good man. Hard as woodpecker lips, but fair." He pointed out the window. "Ridge Road's about a 5-mile walk that way. Turns to gravel after 2, then to dirt. The property's at the very end. Can't miss it. It's where the road stops." I thanked him, paid for my things, and left. The 5-mile walk felt more like 50. The paved road gave way to gravel as promised, the crunch of my footsteps the only sound besides the wind sighing through the towering pines that lined the road like silent sentinels. The sky was darkening, the clouds pregnant with rain. I pulled up the hood of my thin jacket and walked faster. By the time the dirt track petered out into a wall of overgrown foliage, a cold drizzle had started. This was it, the end of the road. My grandfather's land was not welcoming. It was a tangle of blackberry bushes, ferns, and young alder trees, all fighting for space under the shadow of ancient Douglas firs. There was no house, no cabin, not even the ruins of one. Just 5 acres of wild, untamed land. It was exactly as worthless as Abernathy had said. For a moment, despair washed over me. I had spent the last of my money and hope chasing a ghost to this forgotten patch of dirt. I was an idiot, a lost kid playing make-believe. I almost turned back. I almost walked the 5 miles back to town and caught the next bus to anywhere. But then I looked at the map again. North face of the ridge. I found the ridge easily enough, a steep, rocky spine of land that ran along the back of the property. The north face was sheer, slick with moss and rain. It seemed impossible. I spent the next hour scrambling along its base, my hands raw, my clothes soaked through. The rain was coming down harder now, cold and persistent. I was about to give up when my foot slipped on a loose patch of earth, sending a small cascade of soil and rock tumbling down. And there, beneath the dirt and moss I had dislodged, was a flat gray corner of something that was not rock. It was concrete. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dropped to my knees and started digging with my bare hands, tearing at the soil and roots. The cold didn't matter anymore. The rain didn't matter. I dug until my fingers were numb and bleeding, uncovering a large rectangular concrete slab set flush into the hillside. And in the center of it was a recessed, heavy steel door, its surface covered in a thick layer of rust that looked like dried blood. There was no handle, only a single dark keyhole. It was real. Whatever this was, it was real. My hands were trembling as I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It felt ancient and heavy, a piece of forgotten history. I wiped the mud from the keyhole and slid the key in. It grated, fighting me, but then with a final push, it sank in all the way. I grasped it with both hands and turned. For a moment, nothing happened. I put all my weight into it, my muscles straining. Then, with a deep, groaning shudder that seemed to come from the center of the earth, something inside the door gave way. A loud clang echoed through the forest, startling a flock of crows from the trees. The sound was deafening, a sound of finality, of release. A faint, musty smell, the smell of trapped air and long-forgotten things, seeped from the edges of the door. I took a deep breath, braced myself against the concrete, and pulled. The door was immensely heavy, but it moved, scraping against its frame with a tortured screech of metal on metal. I managed to open it just wide enough to slip through. I switched on the flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp white cone through the absolute darkness within, and stepped across the threshold, out of the rain and into my grandfather's secret. The air inside was cold and dead, carrying the scent of dust, damp concrete, and something else. A faint metallic tang, like old machinery. The flashlight beam danced around, revealing a short, steep set of concrete steps leading down into blackness. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me. It closed with a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the soles of my shoes, plunging me into a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I was sealed in. For a terrifying second, panic seized me. What if I couldn't get it open again from the inside? I fought the urge to scramble back up the steps and test it. No, I had to trust. Trust what you find. My grandfather's words. I took a slow, deliberate breath and began my descent. The steps ended in a large, square room. I swept the beam of the flashlight across it, my boots crunching on the dusty concrete floor. It was a military bunker. There was no other word for it. The walls were thick, poured concrete, the ceiling reinforced with steel I-beams. Along one wall were shelves filled with military-grade surplus, gas masks in canvas bags, sealed tins of what I assumed were rations, canteens, and several jerry cans of water. A simple cot with a neatly folded wool blanket sat in one corner. Next to it was a small wooden table and a single chair. It was Spartan, functional, and looked like it had been waiting for someone for a very long time. It was a tomb, a fallout shelter, a place to hide from the end of the world. Why would my grandfather, a carpenter, have something like this? What was he so afraid of? My light fell on a large green metal footlocker tucked under the cot. It was the only personal item in the entire room. It wasn't locked. My fingers, still numb with cold, fumbled with the latches. They sprang open with a sharp snap. I lifted the heavy lid. The smell of cedar and mothballs wafted out. Inside, neatly folded, was a set of old, worn work clothes, a flannel shirt and denim overalls. They smelled faintly of sawdust, a scent that struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was him. It was the smell of my grandfather. Beneath the clothes was a small, framed photograph. I picked it up, wiping the dust from the glass. It was a picture of a much younger me, maybe 5 or 6 years old, sitting on his shoulders. We were both grinning at the camera, the sun in our eyes. I didn't remember the picture being taken, but I remembered the feeling of being safe, of being on top of the world. A hard lump formed in my throat. At the very bottom of the locker was what I was looking for. A stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. They were addressed to me in that same spidery handwriting. There were at least a dozen of them, but one was on top, separated from the others, with a single word written on it. First. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the knot. I sat down on the edge of the cot, the thin mattress springs creaking in the immense silence. The air in the bunker was so still, so dead, that the sound of me tearing open the envelope was shockingly loud. I unfolded the letter. It was several pages long, the paper crisp, every line filled with that tight, controlled script. I took a breath and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it started, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I hope the world has been kinder to you than I was. I know you have questions. I know you must hate me. You have every right to. I am writing this so that you might, if not forgive me, at least understand. I never wanted to send you away. You were the only good thing in my life, the only thing that mattered. But I had to. I had to make you disappear." My eyes scanned the page, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Before you were born, I was not a good man. I was involved with people who operated in the shadows. I made a mistake, a terrible one. I partnered with a man named Silas Croft. We were supposed to be buying up land for legitimate development, but he was a shark. He was using intimidation, threats, and fraud to force people to sell. When I found out the extent of it, I wanted out. I had evidence against him, ledgers and documents that could have sent him to prison for a very long time. I threatened to go to the police. That was my mistake." The words on the page seemed to blur. I could feel the cold concrete seeping through my jeans, but I couldn't move. Croft didn't take kindly to threats. He made it clear that if I ever spoke a word, he would destroy everything I loved. And by then, Leo, the only thing I loved was you. Your parents were gone, and you were all I had. He knew that. He had me followed. He had you followed. I saw them, watching you play at the park, sitting in a car outside your school. They weren't just watching. They were hunting. I lived in a state of constant, gut-wrenching terror. Not for myself, but for you. I couldn't go to the police because Croft had people everywhere, and I couldn't prove the threats without revealing the evidence, which would have put you in even more danger. I was trapped. I stopped reading, my chest tight, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I remembered being watched. I'd told my grandfather about a strange car, and he'd gone pale, his face a mask of fear I was too young to understand. He'd told me it was nothing, just my imagination. I forced myself to continue reading. I built this bunker with my own 2 hands, years before, as a precaution. A place to run if things ever went bad. But I realized that hiding you with me wasn't enough. As long as you were tied to me, you would be a target. You would be leverage. The only way to truly keep you safe was to sever that tie. I had to make it look like I didn't care. I had to make you a ward of the state, a nameless file in a vast bureaucratic system where Croft could never find you. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. The day I dropped you at the social services office, I told you I couldn't take care of you anymore. I saw the look in your eyes, the confusion, the betrayal. It shattered my soul, Leo. I drove away from you, and I didn't stop crying for 100 miles. Every day for 8 years, I have lived with that moment. Every day, I have woken up with the knowledge that my son's son believes I abandoned him. I let the letter fall from my hands. A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on my cheek, then another, and another. Soon I was sobbing, great, racking sobs that tore through my body, echoing in the silent concrete tomb. The sound was ugly, raw, the sound of 8 years of pain, of anger, of a loneliness so deep I had forgotten what it felt like to not be lonely. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected. In the most brutal, cruel, and selfless way imaginable, I had been loved. I cried for the grandfather I had hated, for the man who had lived in his own prison of grief just to keep me safe. I cried for the 10-year-old boy who thought his world had ended, who had learned to build walls around his heart so thick that nothing could get in. I cried until I had nothing left, until I was just a hollow, aching shell sitting on a cot in the dark, the truth of my past laid bare in a letter from a dead man. When the storm of grief finally passed, I was left with a strange and unnerving calm. The bunker no longer felt like a tomb. It felt different, like a sanctuary, a place of truth. I sat there for what felt like hours, the flashlight beam growing weaker, the silence of the earth pressing in on me. The letter lay on the floor where I'd dropped it. The last paragraph was still unread. I picked it up, my hands steady now, and read the final words. This bunker is yours now, Leo. There are supplies here to last you for months. There is more information hidden away if you feel you need it. But you don't have to look for it. My fight does not have to be your fight. You are free. You can take what little money I left you and walk away. Start a new life. Forget about me, and forget about Silas Croft. That is all I ever wanted for you, to be safe and to be free. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you. Know that every day I was proud of you. Your loving grandfather, Alistair. The choice he laid out was so clear it was brutal. Walk away and be free, or dig deeper and inherit a war. For 8 years my life had been about survival, about keeping my head down and staying out of trouble. The smart choice, the sane choice, was to take the money and run, to honor his sacrifice by living the free life he'd bought for me at such a terrible cost. But could I? Could I walk away knowing this man, Silas Croft, was still out there? The man who had stolen my childhood, who had condemned my grandfather to a life of lonely torment. The anger I had felt for my grandfather, so misdirected for so long, now had a target. It was a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. It demanded justice. And then there was the other part of me, the part that had been starved for connection for so long. This story, this fight, was the only thing I had left of him. To walk away from it felt like abandoning him all over again. If you've ever reached a crossroads in your life, a moment where the person you were is no longer the person you can be, then you know what this felt like. It's a terrifying, electrifying moment. The past offers a reason. The future offers a choice. I want to take a second here and just say, if you're finding something of your own story in mine, I'm glad you're here. This channel is for people who have had to navigate the hard stuff, who have had to find their own truth buried under years of pain. A subscribe means you're part of a community that understands that. It means a lot. Now let's get back to the story, because what I decided to do in that bunker wasn't just about my past. It was about who I was going to be from that day forward. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I would not walk away. I couldn't. I owed it to him. I owed it to the 10-year-old boy who never got to say a proper goodbye. I had to know the rest of the story. I had to see it through to the end. His fight was my fight now. The letter had said there was more information, hidden away. I stood up, my joints stiff from the cold and from sitting for so long. I took the flashlight and began to search. I started with the shelves, tapping the walls behind them, checking the tins of food for false bottoms. Nothing. I checked the cot, lifting the thin mattress, running my hands along the metal frame. Still nothing. I went over every square inch of that room, my frustration mounting. Where would a man like my grandfather, a practical, careful man, hide something important? He would hide it in plain sight. Or he would hide it in the last place anyone would think to look. My eyes fell on the floor. It was a solid slab of concrete, but under the cot, where the footlocker had been, the surface seemed different. I knelt, running my hand over it. There was a faint, almost invisible seam, a hairline crack forming a perfect square, about 2 feet by 2 feet. I pushed on one edge. It didn't move. I took the iron key from my pocket, the only tool I had, and wedged its tip into the crack, prying upwards. The concrete shifted with a grating sound. It was a panel, a lid. I got my fingers underneath it and lifted. It was heavy, but it came free. Beneath it was a small, dark cavity, and nestled inside that cavity was another box. This one was a small, steel safe box, the kind used for documents and cash. It wasn't locked. It was just waiting. I lifted it out. It was far heavier than it looked. I carried it over to the table and set it down. My heart was pounding again, a slow, heavy drum beat in the quiet bunker. I took a deep breath and opened it. The contents of the box stole the air from my lungs. The top layer was cash, stacks and stacks of it, all $100 bills, bundled with simple rubber bands. I didn't count it, but there had to be tens of thousands of dollars there, maybe more. It was a fortune, enough to disappear and live comfortably for a very long time. It was the escape he had promised. But beneath the cash was something far more valuable. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger and another envelope, this one sealed with the same wax stamp as the one Abernathy had given me. I opened the letter first. The handwriting was the same, but the tone was different. It was no longer the voice of a grieving grandfather. It was the voice of a man preparing for war. "Leo," it began, "if you have found this, you have chosen not to run. I am sorry for that. I am sorry this has fallen to you. But I am also proud. This is the choice I could never make. The money is yours, no matter what. Use it to protect yourself. But this ledger, this is the weapon. It contains everything. Every illegal transaction, every bribe, every threat Silas Croft ever made. It is my confession and his conviction, all in one. I was his bookkeeper in the beginning. I saw it all. It's all in there. The names, the dates, the accounts. It is the truth. For years, Croft has been trying to acquire all the land on this ridge for a luxury resort development. He has bullied and bankrupted every family here. My 5 acres are the last holdout. This worthless piece of rock is the linchpin in his multi-million-dollar plan. He thinks with me gone, the land will be his. He doesn't know about you. The letter went on to detail exactly what the ledger contained, how to understand the codes my grandfather had used. It was a meticulous record of a criminal empire. The final lines were a direct charge, a passing of a torch. "You have two choices, son. Take the money and the ledger and disappear. He will never find you. Or take this to Arthur Abernathy. He was my only friend, the only one I trusted. He will know what to do. The choice is yours. Avenge me or live for me. Either way, be safe." I closed my eyes, the weight of the ledger in my lap feeling immense. It was a book of sins, my grandfather's and Croft's. It was a heavy inheritance. Just as I was processing the enormity of it all, a shrill, alien sound shattered the silence. It took me a moment to place it. It was my phone. The cheap burner phone was ringing, its tinny ringtone a violent intrusion into this subterranean world. I fumbled in my pocket and answered it. "Hello? Leo? It's Arthur Abernathy." His voice was sharp, urgent. All traces of the dry, disinterested lawyer were gone. "I'm glad I reached you. We have a problem. A big one." "What is it?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant, disconnected from the reality of the situation. "A development firm, Croft Enterprises, has just filed an accelerated foreclosure claim against your grandfather's property," Abernathy said, the words coming fast and clipped. "They've produced a promissory note, supposedly signed by Alistair, securing a massive debt against the land. They claim he defaulted. The note looks legitimate, but I know Alistair would never have been that foolish. It has to be a forgery. The problem is, they have a judge on their side. They've been granted an expedited hearing. We have 48 hours to formally respond, or the court will grant them the title. They're trying to steal it, Leo, and they're doing it fast." Silas Croft. The name was no longer a ghost from a letter. He was real, and he was making his move. My grandfather had been dead for less than a week, and his enemy was already at the gates. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Croft must have been watching, waiting for Alistair to die, assuming the property would fall into a messy probate where he could snatch it up for pennies. He never counted on me. He never counted on the bunker, or the letters, or the ledger currently sitting in my lap. The world upstairs was moving, while I had been sitting in the dark, lost in the past. Now the past was colliding with the present. "Leo, are you there?" Abernathy's voice was tense. "Did you hear me?" I looked at the ledger. I looked at the stacks of cash. Avenge me or live for me. The choice wasn't a choice anymore. Croft had made it for me. He wasn't just coming for the land. He was coming for my grandfather's memory. He was trying to erase the last piece of him, to pave over his life and build a resort on his bones. A cold, clear certainty settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a hard, unyielding resolve. I was not a scared kid from the system anymore. I was Alistair Davies' grandson, and this was my land. "I hear you, Mr. Abernathy," I said, and my voice was different. It was steady. It was calm. It was the voice of a man who knew exactly what he had to do. "I think I have something you need to see, something that's going to stop Mr. Croft for good." The next 48 hours were a blur of motion and purpose. I hiked back to Hemlock Creek, the steel box heavy in my duffel bag, the cash a startling weight against my back. I felt like a different person from the aimless kid who had walked this road less than a day ago. I had a mission. I caught the first bus back toward the city, my mind racing the entire way. Told me to come directly to his office, no matter what. I was on my way. I didn't give him details over the phone, just that I had found what my grandfather had left for me. He told me to come directly to his office, no matter the hour. I arrived at his building late at night. The city was a blaze of lights, but it felt distant and unreal. The only reality was the bunker, the letters, the heavy weight of the ledger. Abernathy met me himself, letting me in through a private entrance. The office was dark, save for a single lamp on his desk that cast long shadows across the room. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, alert. "What did you find, son?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't say a word. I just opened my duffel bag on his desk, took out the steel box, and opened it. I placed the ledger on the polished mahogany. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out a trembling hand and touched the worn leather cover. "I knew he kept it," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "I told him to burn it, to run. But he was too stubborn, too honorable." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the mask of the professional lawyer fall away completely. In his eyes, I saw grief and a fierce, protective loyalty. "Your grandfather was my best friend, Leo. He saved my life once, a long time ago. I owed him a debt I could never repay. Helping you, maybe this is how I finally do it." We spent the rest of the night poring over the ledger, Abernathy translating my grandfather's coded entries. It was all there. A decade of crime, meticulously documented. Bribes to county officials, extortion rackets, fraudulent loan applications. It was enough to bring down not just Croft, but half the local government. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light into the office, Abernathy finally closed the book. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with a grim satisfaction. "This is more than enough." He made copies of the most damning pages. He made a phone call to a contact he had at the state attorney's office, a man, he said, owed him a favor and hated corruption. The wheels of justice, long rusted and still, began to turn. The day of the hearing, I sat in the back of the courtroom. Abernathy had insisted I stay out of sight. Croft was there, a handsome, silver-haired man in an expensive suit, looking confident and smiling at his lawyers. He looked like a pillar of the community, not a monster. He didn't even glance around the room. I was nobody to him, a ghost. When the judge called the case, Croft's lawyer stood up and presented the forged promissory note with a flourish. It all seemed so official, so insurmountable. Abernathy stood. He didn't address the note. He simply said, "Your Honor, before we proceed, I would like to submit new evidence pertaining to the business practices of the plaintiff, Mr. Silas Croft." He placed a single thick file on the judge's bench. As the judge began to read, a silence fell over the courtroom. I watched Croft's face. The confident smile faltered. His eyes darted from the judge to Abernathy, a flicker of confusion turning to alarm. The judge's face grew pale. He looked up, not at the lawyers, but at two men in dark suits who had quietly entered the back of the courtroom. State investigators. They walked calmly down the aisle, approached Silas Croft, and one of them leaned in and spoke quietly in his ear. The color drained from Croft's face. The pillar crumbled. The monster was revealed. It was all very quiet, very civil. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene, just the quiet, methodical dismantling of a man's life. They led him away, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. The case was dismissed. The land was mine, free and clear. It was over. The war was won. In the weeks that followed, the story unspooled in the local papers. Croft's empire was a house of cards, built on fear and fraud, and my grandfather's ledger was the gust of wind that blew it all down. Other people, emboldened by his arrest, came forward with their own stories. It was an avalanche of truth. I used some of the money my grandfather had left me to pay Abernathy for his services, though he tried to refuse. The rest I put in the bank. It was a safety net, a foundation. But the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the land. It was the bunker. I went back to Hemlock Creek. I bought a used pickup truck and supplies. I spent my days on that 5-acre parcel of land, clearing the overgrown brush, letting the sunlight reach the forest floor for the first time in years. I worked with my hands, just like he had. I found the foundation of his old house, the one I barely remembered, and I started to dream of rebuilding it. The bunker was no longer a dark, secret place. I aired it out, cleaned it from top to bottom. It was my history, my sanctuary. I left the cot and the table, a quiet memorial to the man who had spent so many lonely years protecting me. I would sit down there sometimes, in the profound silence, and read his other letters. They weren't about Silas Croft. They were about me. He had written them over the years, one for each birthday he'd missed. He wrote about what he imagined I was doing, what kind of man I was becoming. He wrote about his pride, his regret, his unending love. He had never been gone. He had been with me the whole time, watching from a distance, his love a shield I never knew I had. One day, the old man from the general store drove up the newly cleared track to the property. He got out of his truck holding a thermos. "Figured you might be thirsty," he said, handing me a steaming cup of coffee. "Heard what you did, what your granddad did." We stood there for a while, looking out over the ridge. "Alistair was a hard man," the store owner said quietly. "But he was a good one. He loved this land, and he loved you more than anything. He just had a hard way of showing it." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "I know," I said. "I finally know." I wasn't a ward of the state anymore. I wasn't a statistic or a file number. I was Leo Davies, son of this land, grandson of a man who moved heaven and earth to keep me safe. My story wasn't one of abandonment anymore. It was a story of sacrifice, of a love so fierce it was willing to be misunderstood. It was a story of coming home. My grandfather left me with a choice: run from the past or build a future on its foundation. I chose to build. And as I stand here today, on this land that is mine, I feel a peace I never thought possible. The past doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a blueprint. It can be the solid ground beneath your feet. I want to ask you, what foundation are you building on? What parts of your own history have you had to reclaim to become who you are today? If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own truth, I'd be honored if you shared a piece of your journey in the comments below. Your stories matter here. This is a community for people who understand that the deepest roots often grow in the hardest ground. Thank you for listening, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and be part of this conversation, because we all deserve a place to call home.
Oh my god, I hate Mandel. Let's see. We did have that spooky habitat that we needed to build. That's all right. Okay. Oh, we need to build it twice. Gotcha. Okay. Also guys, just as like a okay, here's like a small preview. I told my friend group about my other food quirk, and a couple of them fully crashed out. So like it's bad. As they should. I don't know why I feel like they're melodramatic. No, I can't tell you guys. Like like the Oreo one, I'm like, okay, that one's interesting, right? Um, and like not crazy, just like a little weird. I know this, I know, I know the other food quirk is crazy. Maybe, wait, make that a dino point thing. Wait, do we make it a sub? Maybe I'll make it a sub goal. Make a point. No, points redeemable is way too easy, guys. So, no, I can't do 100,000 points, Ellie. Some of y'all have enough points to, like, do that immediately. You must redeem him, or you never redeem me. Let's see.